Okay, the discourse around Barbie needs to calm down. If you've been on the internet since the Oscar nominations came out on January 23rd, you heard about how Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie were supposedly snubbed in the categories of Best Director and Best Actress in a Leading Role, respectively. There are people you'd expect to weigh in on the topic, like co-star Ryan Gosling sharing their disappointment, and then there's like Hillary Clinton, and she's talking about it for some reason too. Despite the fact that every single year there are nominations, wins, losses, and omissions that set the film community on fire, this is the one time in recent memory where it feels like the mainstream media and lay people on the street not only heard about the supposed snub, but created strong opinions about it. So Barbie. Barbie is a good movie. It just is. It was a very well executed, unique take on the fish out of water trope. I don't understand people who genuinely believe that it's awful, and I did not see a single person say that it was bad as a film until award season got started in earnest, aside from the right-wing reactionaries and professional anti-SJWs that you'd expect. Now, you could attribute a lot of the initial excitement around Barbie to people just excited that a movie apparently made by women, for women, about women ended up so financially and even critically successful. It's true, people were really rooting for this movie, but I also think a lot of the popular reaction to it was genuine enjoyment. Now, is Barbie a great movie? I mean, I think it's a great comedy film, but it's certainly not a game-changing piece of art. It didn't change me personally as a viewer, and I don't think it's any remarkable achievement in filmmaking. I'm hesitant to say this because I know many people will interpret this as me saying that Barbie is nothing special when I actually think it is. Plus, comedies tend to be underappreciated when it comes to their technical skill and especially acting performances. That's actually why I think if anyone deserved a nomination, it would probably be Ryan Gosling because he gave the best comedic performance. Although I still do think that actors like Charles Melton and maybe Dominic Sessa deserved a nod more. But just so we all know what we're talking about here, these were the nominations for Best Actress this year. And these were the nominations for Best Director. To me, nominating Greta for Best Director would have actually been even more ridiculous than Margot for Best Actress. I've not yet seen Anatomy of a Fall, but everything I've heard tells me that knocking her out of the category for Greta would have been a huge mistake. The other four nominees were obvious locks, and they should be, so knocking any of them out would have been absurd. Barbie is a good, even great movie. It doesn't deserve Best Director or Best Actress nods, and considering only 5 films get these nods every year, that's fine. This nuanced view, which seems to be shared by most film critics, is problematic if you're trying to join in on a viral Twitter storm, though. Movie takes these days have to be either, this is the greatest film of all time, or this movie is actually terrible and you are all stupid for liking it. And okay, I get the irony of saying something so hyperbolic like that while complaining about how all takes these days are overly hyperbolic, but my point is that discourse is unreasonably polarized when, let's be honest, movies like Barbie, even if they merit this much discussion, should not be such a divisive topic. That being said, I also know why it is. It's to do with women, and women are a complicated issue in societies nowadays. The only true knock I heard a lot right after this movie came out was that for a supposedly super feminist story, Ryan Gosling's Ken was a major focus in the movie, which people considered anything from ironic to frustrating to disappointing. This, of course, rests on 2 assumptions: that Barbie was supposed to be interpreted as a feminist story made for women, and that it would be bad for such a film about women to center the male character so much. My TLDR on this topic is as follows. Barbie is not a feminist manifesto, I don't think it was ever intended to be, and I do not think it is fair to judge it while assuming that that's what it was trying to be. Based on what Greta Gerwig has said about this movie, she wasn't necessarily drawn to it because it was about women explicitly. She seemed to be interested in how dolls like Barbie and Ken embody the concept of perfection. Now, considering Barbie happens to be a very iconic symbol of femininity, the inherent message in such a doll is that perfection for women means femininity. Well, that's an interesting and inarguably feminist idea to explore in film. It's not explored in this film, because that's not what this film is about. Obviously, Barbie does have some pretty explicit discussion of gender, and if you were to take all the gender out of the movie, the plot would essentially go away. But that's not because of Barbie's storyline, it's because we would lose Ken's. Ken is the most active and important character with regards to the plot. That's not a knock on the story. It's not unusual for the plot catalyst to be someone other than the main character. In fact, it's very often an antagonist like Ken is. So is Barbie about gender? Yes, along with identity in general, in the same way that 98% of stories regarding finding one's own identity means finding one's identity as a man. In this instance, the protagonist just happens to be a woman, so her identity outside of being Barbie is tied to being a woman in the real world. And it's obviously about manhood too, which is explored through the arc of all the Kens. Their development as men, however, is really just a series of laughs without the nuanced conclusion that Barbie reaches with her own gendered identity. This is because Ken's storyline is not the main focus here, so it doesn't get or need as much attention. Just because male characters and masculinity are prominent in the plot does not mean that they're what the movie is about. So I really disagree with the complaint that Ken was in too much of the movie. Barbie is about many things. If you had to narrow the meaning down to one thing, however, you would not say that it's about men or manhood or masculinity or Ken finding his own identity. That being said, Barbie is not an all-encompassing feminist manifesto. It's not a treatise on how to fix all issues facing women in society. It's far from being a feminist text in the way that Butler and Dworkin are feminist. It's not even groundbreaking in most of what it has to say about women and their roles in society. It's still certainly pro-feminism, it certainly agrees with feminism, but that's not all that it is. Barbie is about a woman finding her own identity in a world that will punish her for being female. Lady Bird and Little Women are also about girls who seek to develop and embrace their identities in a less than supportive world. When it comes to the actual text of these movies, those two are absolutely about white, girlhood, and womanhood, but they aren't considered feminist stories. There are obviously overtly feminist themes in a work like Little Women. I mean, it even has a scene where the supporting actress gives a monologue about how much it sucks to be a woman in society. But we don't talk about that movie like it's an encapsulation of the female experience. We don't assume any criticism of it is criticism of feminism or its messages. Why does it seem like we approach Barbie this way? Why is it impossible to talk about this movie without addressing what it means for women? In my view, and I am not close to the first person to say this, it's because it's pink. Literally. It wears its femininity on its sleeve in a way that not a lot of media outside of shows aimed at little girls do. And this itself, I don't think was a deliberate decision to lean into any kind of feminist messaging. I think it was marketed as just all things Barbie, and that means all things feminine. And it is great that something can be unapologetically pink and girly and still make over $1 billion and be considered legitimate art. Seeing a film explicitly about gender issues be so successful was great too. But don't confuse that which is feminine as something that is inherently about feminism. This is a movie, a story, more than any one message, and flattening down art made by, about, or for women into just the mega broad theme of feminism means simplifying the complex art that deserves to be made about women's lives. That's what's so great about Greta's works. Her movies are unapologetically female, but they aren't one note and they certainly never feel pandering in a way that they probably would be if they were made by men. We can't and shouldn't expect every movie about women's lives to bear the burden of all of our anxieties around women and gender and equality and somehow turn out to be both a great piece of art and a society-shifting, iconoclastic thesis on feminism. A movie might support a feminist viewpoint, and Barbie does. It might dissect unfair expectations placed on women in society, and Barbie does. It can be a little basic in its analysis and modest in its conclusions, and Barbie is certainly that. But Barbie only failed if you expected something more out of this movie than you were ever going to get. It's like how people complained that Oppenheimer didn't focus enough on the devastation of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or that Killers of the Flower Moon should have focused more on the native characters. That, in my opinion, is a more reasonable complaint than the prior two, but in both instances, viewers are clearly asking for a movie different from what the creator was prepared for and interested in telling. So judge movies, please, please don't be afraid to criticize Barbie just because it's pink or because it was made by a woman, but also judge it for the movie that it is and not the movie that it isn't. To bring this back to the Oscar discourse, which has now reversed and circled back around 30 times, there is a growing number of people who don't think Greta or Margot deserved awards because the movie is just not good. Not that other movies were better, but that it was just flat out bad and overrated. There is a cycle with regards to pretty much any piece of art or entertainment, or even person in entertainment that was once considered good. The cycle goes very good, even great, to the greatest thing ever, to popularly accepted as great in the mainstream, to a little overrated, to actually bad, and eventually to just the punchline of a joke. Some of this happens in wider society, most of it occurs in random corners of Twitter and Reddit and anywhere else take-havers congregate. It's pathological contrarianism, the idea that if something is considered good, especially by the notoriously unsophisticated mainstream masses, it must actually be bad. It happened last year to Everything Everywhere All at Once, and now it's happening to Barbie, which, while not remarkable like Everything Everywhere, is still not a bad movie. So guys, just let Barbie be a good comedy movie with fun performances. I think it earned a Best Picture nod. It would have been very weird if it didn't get one considering its pedigree, but it does not need Best Director. It does not need Margot Robbie or America Ferrera to be nominated. Women do not need Oscars to have their art validated. I agree, when female artists put in the work and get shut out of awards categories that should have been theirs, it's bad and we should call it out. The same goes for stories about women or other domestic issues, subgenres that are considered less important or noteworthy than stories about men, about violence, war, politics, and other masculine-coded issues. We should continue talking about this problem until the status quo changes. But there are enough great female artists making art about women that we don't need to complain about every famous woman who gets passed over. They do not need nominations handed out like participation trophies, as if it's inherently impressive that a woman made a film. And even if you do think that Greta and Margot were so great that they deserved more recognition than they got, I promise you the residuals they're making on their $1.5 billion movie will more than make up for it. And isn't that just the lesson of the day? Women want recognition, but they need money more.
That's just the math. I am super sleazy, born to be easy, and all the papers say that there's no Ken without Barbie. But baby, there's no woman who could possibly stop me. That's just the math.